today, when I meet with General Honore, he is looking at members here, members at home, and in between. So we want to have a scientific approach to how we protect members. I do believe, and I have said this all along, that we will probably need a supplemental for more security for members when the enemy is within the House of Representatives, a threat that members are concerned about in addition to what is happening outside.
I'll show you the true hypocrisy of that statement later, but for now I want to talk about the left's newfound love for security, something that was totally void last summer when cities across America were smoldering. Let me bring in Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton, who has been consistent in his call for law and order. Senator Cotton serves on the Intelligence Committee in the Senate and the Armed Services Committee as well. Senator Cotton, welcome back to the program.
Hey, Tony, it's great to be back on with you. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Now, I want to say at the outset, you've been consistent about this. You called upon the president to use the National Guard, if necessary, last summer when there was rioting in the District of Columbia, rioting across the country. And you said in the wake of the events on January the 6th that law and order needed to be established, and we needed to use whatever means necessary to accomplish that. Is that an accurate assessment?
Yeah, Tony, that's a totally accurate assessment, and I think it's pretty straightforward, and it's shared by the vast majority of Americans. As I said last summer, as I said last month, no quarter for insurrection, violence, chaos, and disorder, that we have to use law enforcement and, if necessary, the National Guard and federal troops to restore order and to stop chaos and violence wherever it happens, no matter what political slogans a mob chants. That was true last summer when they were burning down small businesses and tearing down statues of venerable Americans like George Washington and U.S. Grant. It was true on January 6th. Now, I wrote an op-ed to that effect in the New York Times. It caused their newsroom to go into meltdown. People lost their jobs there over it. I'm somewhat bemused over the last month on how many of those liberals who decried my op-ed at the time have now joined me on Team Send In the Troops whenever it's necessary to restore order and to stop the violence.
So
now, flip side of it,
I'm not the only one that sees that.
No, it's I've been sitting back in bemused observation, but it's better late than never. The principle should be, though, is that we, in a civilized society like ours, we can have no tolerance for mob violence, for disorder, for chaos, no matter what slogans a mob chants, no matter what signs they carry. Now, the flip side of that, Tony, is we shouldn't have an overwhelming presence of law enforcement and the military when there is not a threat of violence. So what happened on January 6th is the result in no small part of poor planning and coordination by the leadership of the Capitol Hill security forces. The two sergeants of arms and the Capitol Hill police chief have resigned, rightly so. As we review more what happened, that accountability may have to go further into leadership. But the officers on the front lines behaved heroically in many cases. Tragically, one lost their life in it.
Yeah.
But they were not fully prepared. They didn't have the equipment they needed. It appeared to me, looking at the videos, they had not been fully briefed on rules of engagement. They certainly didn't have the kind of physical barriers that were necessary to be in place.
But in their defense, as a former police officer, and just kind of, I'm conscious of security issues. I worked in anti-terrorism, and although that's not my field anymore, you still have a little bit of that ingrained. Quite frankly, I think this was a surprise to so many people. I mean, we live here in America. We have protests, and yes, we do have the rioting and stuff that goes on. But the respect for the capital of the United States and what it represents, it was shocking to me.
Yeah, it was shocking. It's a terrible day. And I understand that some of those security leaders were concerned about visuals or optics, to use the terms I've heard.
Yeah.
And I can understand that. However, it's a much worse visual to have the guy wearing the Viking hat sitting in the Senate dais than to have a large troop presence and police presence outside the Capitol, or what we've had in the last month. But look, my point now has been the inauguration is passed. We're going back to the normal business of the Congress. I'm not aware, still to this day, of specific and credible threats about any kind of major threat to the Capitol. We don't need to have razor wire fences around the Capitol permanently. We don't need to install new physical barriers. We don't need 7,000 National Guardsmen here. I have consulted with the senior Pentagon leaders who were involved in the immediate reaction on January 6th. It is completely feasible in a matter of mere hours to reinstall that anti-riot fencing, to have better coordination with specialized law enforcement agencies in the Capitol, like the FBI, like the Park Police, to have better coordination with the local National Guard in Washington, Virginia, and Maryland, to have a personnel surge and to have temporary obstacles placed if there's ever another threat.
Right.
You know, we already do those things in things like
Right.
the State of the Union or a joint session address. That's what we should be doing now and in the future. We shouldn't turn the Capitol into an armed fortress or an armed camp.
Right, absolutely. Because intelligence will tell you if there's a higher level of threat and if additional troops or additional manpower is needed. But I want to go, you brought something else about the temporary fencing. Another example of the double standard by the left. Remember, I mentioned this a few moments ago in my introduction when President Trump put the temporary fence around the White House property during last summer's rioting. The left went crazy. And, of course, the press across the board celebrated it when it came down, saying Trump was simply trying to hide behind a fence from his critics. There is no end to the hypocrisy of the left from my vantage, from what I see. But let me ask you this, this new love for security, is it only because this provides a platform for political theater pointing to conservative thought or those on the right?
Well, first off, Tony, you're right about the double standard hypocrisy. Continuing to this day, the people who are saying that the National Guard needs to be out in force in thousands in the Capitol indefinitely are turning a blind eye to the violence that continues in places like Portland by Antifa. And that leads to your second point, which is there is certainly a concerted effort, in my opinion, by the Democrats, by liberals in the media, to try to leverage a small element of right-wing extremists' rhetoric or actions against mainstream center-right conservatives that you do not, of course, see in an effort to leverage left-wing extremist rhetoric and action against mainstream center-left Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just a fact if you look at the news coverage of what happened on the Capitol on January 6th, or some of the more kind of egregious statements by some fringe elements who consider themselves to be on the right, versus the violence you see by Antifa over the last 6 to 8 months and extreme statements by those who consider themselves to be on the far left.
Well, or even you know those. Well, I don't know if you will call the Vice President of the United States on the far left or not, but she was a part, and you tweeted this out back during the summer, where she was a part of raising money to bail out those individuals who had been burning down cities.
Let's just say that if Mike Pence had been raising money to bail out people who were arrested after the January 6th violence at the Capitol, I think it would have been a slightly different story and covered slightly differently by the media than when Kamala Harris was raising money for mob rioters in Minneapolis.
Yeah. Again, that double standard. We're going to run out of time here, Senator Cotton, and I want to move on to a couple of other things because a $2 trillion, almost 1.9, I shouldn't exaggerate, almost $2 trillion, another relief package being proposed by the Biden administration. Looked like a little window dressing yesterday when 10 Republican senators met with the Biden administration, or with the president, I should say. But it looks like they're going to move forward with their objective of a huge virus relief bill.
I think they are, Tony. I wouldn't even call it a virus relief bill. I just call it a wish list for liberals that long predated the coronavirus.
Yeah, true.
I'm glad that those 10 Republicans went to meet with Joe Biden to make it clear that Republicans are ready to cooperate to get more targeted coronavirus relief. Look, we passed multiple bills last year with broad bipartisan support, in many cases with unanimous support, Tony.
Yeah.
And if the money that is still not spent from the big March bill, the money that is just barely being spent from the December bill is proven to be not enough for things like vaccine production and distribution, or keeping schools open in places like Arkansas, and finally getting schools open again in places like Chicago, we're willing to listen to that. We're willing to listen to the case for more unemployment insurance for people who are still out of work, in many cases because Democratic governors won't let them go back to work.
Right.
What we're not willing to do is to spend $2 trillion on unrelated liberal priorities.
Well, bailing out blue cities
want to do.
that are mismanaged.
Absolutely. So I'm glad those Republicans went to meet with President Biden, but it's just another example of where it appears that Biden wanted to campaign as a centrist and a unifier, and he spoke about that in his inaugural, but he's governing from the hard left.
Without question, we saw that last week in all of the executive orders that came flying out of the Oval Office. Senator Tom Cotton, as always, great to talk with you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Tony.
All right, Senator Tom Cotton, consistent in his viewpoints.